Orange or grape or cranberry, dear? Cranberry is good for the bones, you know. My grandmother ignored the interruption. She didn't even bother to answer, having turned away at the woman's arrival, as if angry about her appearance. The woman looked at me and winked. A conspiratorial kind of wink. It was kind of horrible. I didn't think people winked like that anymore. In fact, I hadn't seen a wink in years. She doesn't care much for juices, the woman said, talking to me as if my grandmother weren't even there. But she loves her coffee, with lots of cream and 2 lumps of sugar. But this is juice time, not coffee time. Addressing my grandmother again, she said, Orange or grape or cranberry, dear? Tell her I want no juices, Mike, my grandmother commanded regally, her eyes still watching invisible birds. The woman smiled, patience like a label on her face. That's all right, dear. I'll just leave some cranberry for you. Drink it at your leisure. It's good for the bones. She wheeled herself out of the room. My grandmother was still absorbed in the view. Somewhere a toilet flushed. A wheelchair passed the doorway. Probably the same old driver fleeing a hit-and-run accident. The television set exploded with sound somewhere, soap opera voices filling the air. You can always tell soap opera voices. I turned back to find my grandmother staring at me. Her hands cupped her face, her index fingers curled around her cheeks like parenthesis marks. You know, Mike, looking back, I think you were right, she said, continuing our conversation as if there had been no interruption. You always said, it's the things of the spirit that count, Meg. The spirit. And so you bought the baby grand piano. A baby grand in the middle of the Depression. A knock came on the door and it was the delivery man. It took 5 of them to get it into the house. She leaned back, closing her eyes. How I loved that piano, Mike. I was never that fine a player, but you loved to sit there in the parlor on Sunday evenings, Ellie in your lap, listening to me play and sing. She hummed a bit, a fragment of a melody I didn't recognize. Then she drifted into silence. Maybe she'd fallen asleep. My mother's name is Ellen, but everyone always calls her Ellie. Take my hand, Mike, my grandmother said suddenly. Then I remembered. My grandfather's name was Michael. I had been named for him. Ah, Mike, she said, pressing my hands with all her feeble strength. I thought I'd lost you forever, and here you are, back with me again. Her expression scared me. I don't mean scared as if I were in danger, but scared because of what could happen to her when she realized the mistake she had made. My mother always said I favored her side of the family. Thinking back to the pictures of the old family albums, I recalled my grandmother as tall and thin, like me. But the resemblance ended there. He was 35 when he died, almost 40 years ago, and he wore a mustache. I brought my hand to my face. I also wore a mustache now, of course. I sit here these days, Mike, she said, her voice a lullaby, her hand still holding mine, and I drift and dream. The days are fuzzy sometimes, merging together. Sometimes it's like I'm not here at all, but somewhere else altogether. And I always think of you, those years we had. Not enough years, Mike, not enough. Her voice was so sad, so mournful, that I made sounds of sympathy. Not words exactly, but the kind of soothings that mothers murmur to their children when they awaken from bad dreams. And I think of that terrible night, Mike, that terrible night. Have you ever really forgiven me for that night? Listen, I began. I wanted to say, Nana, this is Mike your grandson, not Mike your husband. Shh, shh, she whispered, placing a finger as long and cold as a candle against my lips. Don't say anything. I've waited so long for this moment, to be here with you. I wondered what I would say if suddenly you walked in the door like other people have done. I've thought and thought about it, and I finally made up my mind. I'd ask you to forgive me. I was too proud to ask before. Her fingers tried to mask her face. But I'm not so proud anymore, Mike. That great voice quivered and then grew strong again. I hate you to see me this way. You always said I was beautiful. I didn't believe it. The charity ball when we led the grand march and you said I was the most beautiful girl there. Nana, I said, I couldn't keep the pretense any longer, adding one more burden to my load of guilt, leading her on this way, playing a pathetic game of make-believe with an old woman clinging to memories. She didn't seem to hear me.